welcome to this IDnext Lunchbreak, the last one of this year. And we do have an interesting topic today regarding major security findings in multi-cloud environments and their implications. It's co-hosted also by Nixu. And welcome, my name is Robert Gaskamp. I'm the founder of IDnext Platform. And before we will start with the lunch break, let me, for those people who don't know IDnext yet, give you some background. We already started more than 12 years ago, and our main mission is all about sharing knowledge and expertise. And there are multiple ways to do this. As you know, we also have our annual event, but also we do organize IDnext lunch breaks. That means that we have one team, one guest, and also hope that you have a sandwich with you to enjoy. The idea also of this lunch break is to be interactive. So if you have any questions, please use the chat function. Then we can also make sure that those questions will be asked. If it will not fit into the lunch break, we will make sure also that the questions will be asked after the lunch break, and we'll come back to you. Regarding IDnext itself, an open independent platform, number of things, create awareness about this identity. Is really interesting topic already for the last maybe 20 years. Some topics are still the same, but discussions are different, but still important to create this awareness, to share this with IDnext community, but also outside of the community itself. And we would like to provide a knowledge and network platform for experts, in special different target audience like the IT, business, but also marketeers. And we do also support and facilitate innovative approaches in the world of digital identity. Together with you, we would like to aim for secure digital identity, and also, having this IDnext lunch break should help. So if we go to the IDnext lunch break for today, would like to welcome Sakari and also Panu for being here and giving your view about major security findings in multi-cloud environments and their implications. So the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So this is the agenda for today from our side. So going through quickly a little bit of introductions from our side, and then dive into Amazon and Microsoft Cloud findings from our cloud security assessments. And as mentioned, we can have the major questions and answers session at the end of it. And if you happen to have comments or questions during the presentation, please just put your virtual hand up and we'll try to tackle them as they come along. But without further ado, let's move forward to personal introductions. My name is Sakari Piiliatta. I lead our cloud security business unit here at Nixu, and been in cybersecurity business one way or the other for over 10 years now. And within Nixu now 5.5 years. And going through sales function and then being in part of the SOC service production unit and so forth, and now here in cloud security.
Yes, and hello, my name is Panu Melkki. I'm a cloud security consultant working at Nixu in Sakari's team. I'm the technical lead of our AWS and Google Cloud Platform team. My history within the cybersecurity field reaches back to 2005. I've been doing a lot of work around digital identity for the first 10 plus years of my career, and then since 2018 roughly, I have been steering myself more towards cloud security area. So yeah, that's it from my presentation at this point.
Good. Then a little bit of background on what are we going to go through today. On Nixu Corporation in itself, we're purely focused on cybersecurity, and hence anything that we do also in cloud context has a flavor of security in it. One part of our portfolio is this cloud security assessments. that we've done roughly 70 during the past 3 years now to different public clouds, including Microsoft, AWS, and Google. And within these assessments, they are quite in-depth technical assessments of the security of the said cloud. And based on these findings, we've created this presentation, which consists not only like critical ones, but especially the most common issues that we find in these assessments, and also how to mitigate those challenges or misgivings within those cloud environments. But that's the focus for today. And without further ado, next it is Panu.
Yeah, thanks. So we're going to start off with the AWS findings, and it's somewhat technical, so bear with me. I'll try to explain things in a understandable manner. And the first item on the list is maybe not too surprisingly related to the identity and access management related things. So I would say that basically in all of our assessments that we have been conducting, this comes up one way or another about the too wide permissions within the environment. There are multiple different, let's say, scenarios and findings related to this one, but basically I would say that the most common ones are about coarse-grained permissions, admin type of users, power users and whatnot. And the second finding relates to using AWS built-in or AWS managed roles or policies, which actually grant you too wide permissions. So for instance, read-only access gives you not only permissions to read all the configuration data within the account, but it actually gives you also access to the data itself within the account in the forms of like S3 buckets, for instance. So there is always also the boundary of keeping the data and the configuration separated. Usually this is due to the fact that there are maybe immature IAM processes or governance processes. Organizations have a large footprint in cloud these days. There are a lot of DevSecOps teams and tribes and whatnot operating there mainly on their own. So they have quite a large let's say, independence to operate within their own environments, which then leads to these kind of issues. There are certain technical ways like using guardrails and boundaries to restrict the permissions, and there are also some toolings you can use to actually trying to understand what the level of the permissions is and if they should be reduced. But this is something that we don't see happening too often, unfortunately. The second one is also about IAM. It's about long-lived credentials, and this is especially something kind of what takes place in the AWS environment, where we can have let's say hard-coded access keys or access tokens which are long-lived and usually there's two findings. Users have been creating access keys that have not been used for a long time. That's one thing. So they are dormant, they are not being used. And if they are being used, then they are not rotated frequently. Again, this kind of reflects the governance side of things. So you are not forcing your end users to rotate the keys. The longer the keys, these hard-coded credentials are out there, the riskier it gets if those credentials get leaked one way or another. Obviously, when you are doing modern cloud development, you should start shifting also to using temporary keys through the means of AWS Identity Center, for instance. And Obviously, there's always going to be some exceptions here and there. Identity management is also about exception management. So when you know that you need long-lived credentials somewhere, then you should fully document those, understand what those keys are, where they are being used, and by whom, and still have the rotation in place.
We do have a question.
Yes, go ahead.
And the question is, I think on the previous slide, is about what is the base of assessment followed by any regulatory compliance, and how are the assessments performed?
Yeah, so we do let's say SIS benchmark, AWS foundational security best practices are for instance two of these let's say starting points where we have a basic set of controls that we are reflecting. Obviously, we do have controls on top of those as well. The assessment is conducted, let's say, from two directions. So it's bottom up when we're doing the technical scanning of the environment and collecting the configuration data and understanding the kind of the technical issues. But it's also top down from the architectural perspective. So we do arrange a workshop with the client to understand what the environment is all about, what kind of a data is being processed there, what is the nature of the data, and these kind of things. So then we kind of combine these two things together, which will then kind of be formulated as the final report for the assessment. So that's maybe my answer for that question at this time. All right. Thanks. Moving on to the detection, logging, and monitoring part. So a lot of the cloud services either automatically log stuff, or then you need to do that or enable the logging yourself. Usually, it's so that there are services where the logging has not been enabled, and even if it has been, the logs are just scattered around within the account. They can be in an S3 bucket, they can be in AWS service called CloudWatch Logs and whatnot, but nobody kind of clearly has understanding where those logs are put in terms from the if you look things from the security perspective. So from the development teams, what matters for them usually is the operational logs, something that they can detect if the program is malfunctioning, or if the solution is not working correctly, or for debugging purposes, if it's about development environment and so on. But if you would need to start doing, let's say, security incident response or collecting digital forensics, then knowing where the logging is, making sure that the logs stored are actually not tampered, for instance. These kind of things, many of the development teams usually tend to neglect to some extent. So also, we kind of, when we have been doing assessments with some, let's say, more mature organizations, if you start asking whether they have actually been testing, how those logs actually work, what are the means to find and search information through those logs, they might not have conducted those kind of an exercises as well. So it's pretty important to have these kind of as part of your disaster recovery process and disaster recovery exercises, to also look into the application logs and how the platform as such is collecting the logs and who has access to them and so on. Fourth one is about blast radius. So it's kind of a umbrella term for anything that could happen within an let's say AWS account, which is one environment, if you will. So one thing happening in that environment could lead to something more catastrophic. And here a common issue, especially in let's say older environments, is that you are actually running multiple different workloads from multiple different teams within the same account. Also, the developers might have access to production environments. They should not, especially if you are doing or are into business with something where the data is critical, PII data and whatnot, financial data. So the developers should not be allowed to access the production environment, at least not with the admin privileges, maybe some read-only permissions to see the technical setup only. And then also we've noticed that even if the production environment has been isolated from the developers, then some organizations are doing what you call like a production data is copied to the lower environment, some kind of a refresh of the development environments or development the databases, which actually then means that if you don't do some data magic while you're doing the copying, then you might actually have some production data in your lower level environments, which is a really bad practice as well. So understanding what you have is obviously the key to protect your environment. So having kind of inventory which actually covers it all is pretty important, and also understanding what kind of a data you have, where that is stored, who has access, who should have access, and why, and then obviously managing the infrastructure and the environments should happen using DevSecOps practices, the CI/CD pipelines and whatnot, and those should obviously be hardened as well, very thoroughly.
Okay. So Mikko raised his hand, so I think he has a question.
Yep.
Yeah, I have a question. It's regarding, you said the kind of quote unquote forget implementation of certain logging capabilities or detection capabilities.
Yep.
Why do you think it's happening? Why are this being forgot?
Yeah, I think there's it somehow drills down to the fact that you have the development teams are pretty scattered, like I mentioned. So it's quite they are independent. They are not maybe understanding the security requirements, if there are even any. I mean, we are dealing with a lot of corporations who have been in the business for a very long time, and they just started their digitalization or some digital transformation programs within the past, 2, 3, 4 years ago. So they have like their IT security teams and cybersecurity teams might not be on par on what's going on in the cloud at all. So that's also one thing. So there's probably multiple reasons why this is happening, and also I think that generally speaking, the people tend to forget the shared responsibility matrix of what is the responsibility of AWS and what is responsibility of the client. So it's not one or two times when I've been asking about backups and backup procedures, and I've get the response from the client saying that it's AWS, they are taking care of it for us. We don't have to do anything. So there's a lot of things there. It's not just one particular reason, I would say. So I'm not sure if this answers your question.
No, it does answer my question. I knew it's not a simple question, and then not a simple answer. And I think you're right in the fact so often security don't know what's going on in the business. I was wondering if it sometimes comes down to cost also. They're like, oh, it's going to cost this, not going to do it. Because I see that as not a major problem, but actually a problem. It's not thought in the business case.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely true there. That's right. And yeah, I mean, quite many organizations still seem or think that the security is a cost thing or a cost center rather than enabling the business. Obviously, it requires communications from cybersecurity vendors like us as well when we are discussing with people. And yeah, the knowledge and how the cybersecurity teams are working within the organizations, that might be a bit different. So they are kind of more interested in understanding, the traditional world, from I don't know, Active Directory and firewalls and these kind of things, and then kind of maybe not neglecting on purpose, but purely because they kind of it's pretty hard to get a grip on these things on the fly, and usually the business is already going full speed in the cloud, and it might be a bit difficult to capture them there. Yeah.
Regarding how things will evolve in this regarding this matter, I think one way to inject the security to business development or to business itself, and see security not only as a cost but actually something that enables your business, is the publicized security incidents and breaches that come up thanks to GDPR and in other situations where, for example, the ransomware attackers are putting public demands to the corporations that they've attacked, and that does bring this topic to the table, and makes these customers and organizations more aware that, okay, this might be the actual true cost if we don't do security good enough.
Yep.
Okay, great. So I also saw that Vijay gave a remark. Not sure, Vijay, would you like to elaborate about your remark?
Yeah. I mean, like, whatever problem you have highlighted are the genuine problem, but we also witnessed the same. But the conclusion that we have observed over the time, specifically in the blue field environment, when the people deployed before the control tower or before a landing zone, seems like they were not having a secure landing zone, and all those problems are logging, highly utilized of the permissions, and then a segregation of the accounts were not there in place. But nowadays, because of this AWS control tower, you can easily deploy it, and then you can meet most of the requirements, specifically around the compliance as well.
Yeah, that's true. Obviously, then let's say that those organizations who have been in the cloud for several years already, and like you said, who have not been having those landing zones from the beginning with, they seem, or some organizations at least, seem to have a bit of technical depth already in the cloud, if you will. So they might not have the control tower in use, or they could have, but they have not migrated everything there or whatnot. So cloud has been around for some time already. So we are also starting to witness this kind of technical depth in some of the organizations. All right, moving on quickly. My last topic is really technical, and I'm not going to talk about it for too long, but it's about instance metadata service, which is relates to the virtual machines, EC2 instances in AWS, but it also touches the container runtime services, Elastic Container Service, and the Kubernetes environment as well. This is something on a general level that the high recommendation is to start using the service version 2. There are a lot of good reasons why to do this, and there has been a lot of breaches happening through this. Because of the fact that the instance metadata service 1 has been in use, and since there are not probably too many cases where you should be using the old version, then stop doing unless you have explicit reason to continue using that one. Maybe as a rule of thumb, if you don't need instance metadata service being enabled on the virtual machines at all, then don't enable it. And also do not assign roles to the instances if you don't specifically need one. So those would be the recommendations here. But this is a rather technical topic. I'm not going to spend too much time talking about that one. And instead, I'm handing it over to Sakari to continue with the Azure stuff then.
Thank you very much. So let's start with Microsoft Azure. And first in the line, we have environment permissions. There's quite many findings in this area in our assessments. First of all, we see that the delegation model hasn't been designed. which leads to overprivileged permissions to different user groups. For example, of this would be an owner rights to individual subscriptions have been provided too broadly, which is quite common in the findings. On another topic, the integration permissions. Example of this, we see that originally API rights have been given too broadly in a situation where correct level of permission was not known at the time. And in many cases, these broad permissions are left in place after the initial configurations as they work, which they do, but from best practices point of view, they are security risk at that time. Regards to Microsoft Dynamics 365, we see there's the situation where application user has been given system admin rights, which is again against best practices. What we still see is that non-Azure Active Directory identities are used. So as an example, consumer side identities are used to give rights to the Azure environment. And the challenge in those type of situation is that the organization doesn't have the same level of control of these consumer side identities versus their own identities. And also with classic administration roles, these dates back to the early times of Azure, before the Azure Resource Manager, ARM, and role-based access control, RBAC. With these, even today, we sometimes see that they are in use. And the issue is that with, for example, PIM, so Privileged Identity Management, it basically controls, it is a control that provides rights for the time that they are needed, and after that, take those rights away. So as PIM doesn't support classic administration roles, it will be bypassed every time. And with multi-factor authentication, MFA, depending on the conditional access policy configurations, it may lead to the situation where MFA is bypassed when using these classic administration roles. How to mitigate this situation? Effectively, we need to evaluate the current state and remove overprivileged permissions, classic administrator and non-ID AAD identities if found, and evaluate the integration permissions of the organization and the environment. And we actually see customers that don't have any delegation model. So if there's no model to be had, then we need to create it. And if there is a model, that needs to be reevaluated in order to find these best practices policies and fix them. Then moving forward from permissions to resource isolation, and including relation to architecture. And why this relation to architecture, one might ask. These findings are based on cloud environments where the resources should be isolated by security policy from the public internet. We see quite a lot of public IPs that are found from the resources that shouldn't have any. As an example, we have a Finnish customer that has roughly 10,000 users. They have 1,000 servers and roughly 100 Azure subscriptions. We did the assessment for them and found out that out of the 1,000 servers, 50 had public IP addresses, and according to the customer, there should only be 2 or 4 servers with public IP addresses. And of course, with these type of findings, considering the organization is quite crucial to the Finnish society, there was some critical fixing to do immediately. So the most critical findings in general are the management ports. So virtual machines, for example, that are open to the internet. If security monitoring is in place correctly, it should be able to mitigate this matter quite nicely. But again, having said that, these are quite common findings in our assessments, these type of issues. How to then fix them? First of all, we need to define a logical boundaries and use of virtual networks and service endpoints to isolate the resources from the public internet. And also remove public IPs from resources that shouldn't have any, as mentioned before. And if security monitoring is in place by the customer itself or the organization or by a third party, the monitor the use and creation of the management ports and public IPs should be in order. Then
we do have a question.
Mm-hmm.
It's about are you recommending clients to move on to passwordless migration from password-based login to overcome identity issues around authentication?
That depends on the customer, like their own policies. We see that from our perspective, it can go either way, depending on the customer industry, for example, or the policies that they need to comply with from the authorities or such. It is case-by-case matter. Then moving forward to audit trails. In general, Azure logs are divided into management and data plane logs. Management plane is enabled by default, and those logs can be found from the Azure subscription activity log. And then again, data plane is not enabled by default, and there lies the issue here. A major finding in this area is that the data plane audit trail is not configured to all resources of the environment. Question may be asked that, okay, should it be so? And that is a good question, because again, it does vary. Should it be to all resources or to some? One factor regarding this is the cost side. There are resources that create a lot of logs, such as Kubernetes, and not all logs are relevant for security monitoring, for example. And one needs to consider also what other security monitoring solutions are in use in the organization to understand what are the relevant logs and what are not. So we have, for example, a case with one of our customers who has Sentinel in use as a part of their security monitoring architecture. And during the summertime, they added some log sources and started logging everything as an example. And what they saw was that Azure consumption, or basically the capacity required by the Sentinel, that went from roughly 30,000 per month. 30 to 50,000 per year, which is quite small, to 1.5 million euros per year. The cost estimate based on how much more logs were put into the Sentinel. And there is a question of, okay, what is the relevant log data and what is not? Not everything that you can log should be logged. And in order to then optimize this equation, monitoring architecture needs to be defined before establishing the audit trail to all resources. This is essential in the security monitoring situation, as mentioned, just from the security cost perspective, but also from when talking about white noise, for example, where you have security operations center and the analyst analyzing, getting the feed from the customer environment. if everything is logged and let's say that your rules are not up to date, then you face the risk of putting too much data in front of your analyst, and they will drown in the white noise. Then configuration can be, in this matter, can be deployed through Azure Policy, which is handy. And if you're using EOC, which is infrastructure as a code, then Azure Policy can monitor the compliance status of this matter. Then, if no additional questions on this topic, we move to the Azure Active Directory part of Microsoft Cloud.
Oh, we just saw a raise a hand by Nico. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Sorry for having all the questions today. You talked about white noise and kind of drowning the analysts. When I talk to the business side, they want to have as much logging, as much intelligence as possible, because they believe the more they know, the easier it might be to detect things, anomalies, whatever.
Yep.
How are there technical capabilities at the moment that can kind of help the analysts a little more than just receiving white noise? I mean, how do you make sure that when the business say, hey, you need to have everything, then you still only get the relevant thing? Or, yeah. I mean, especially across platforms, because when you're working multi-cloud, suddenly you have different loggings coming from different systems, and it's mostly the same analyst looking at it. How do you help those guys?
I think I would say that it is a challenging to answer it purely, but one part is that today, let's say, case example with Microsoft and Microsoft Sentinel and the security tools coming with E5 licenses, there starts to become quite nice from the shelf type of rule packages that you can implement based on Mitra attack matrix that will cover nicely the most common issues with security monitoring and relevant logging. So using the best practices, or in this case, the commonly used rules that will be updated by Microsoft in this case, is a nice starting point. Then the other thing is the experience of the analyst and the SOC function in itself. They need to adjust the screw to, okay, allow more, allow less. And it is basically what we see in, for example, in new SOC customers, we have the service ramp-up project, which is roughly 1.5 to 2 months calendar time, during which time we build up the processes and APIs and so forth. And during this time, we basically start from, we activate the rules and allow, according to those rules, allow all data to pour in. And from there, we start squeezing the screw that, okay, this is too much, that's irrelevant, this is important, we're missing this, let's adjust. And we're doing this, was it twice a week for a new customer? And then when we're starting to get a right amount of white noise, because you have to have something on it, then we will start ramping down the iteration meetings, and it will become a production phase environment for us. So use what you have from vendors and from technology tool providers, and then have experienced team to do the adjusting. Did I answer your question?
Absolutely. Thank you.
Roger that. Moving forward to Azure AD conditional access policies. Over here, we see quite often the misconfiguration or lack of configuration of Azure AD conditional access policies, or CAP for friends. And there are usually three different types of issues there. First, the most common and usual, we lack the strong authentication for users, whether those be admins, end users, or guests. That's quite easily fixable, but still present in many cases in our assessments. Strong authentication is not required. Legacy authentication protocols are not blocked. Case in point, according to Microsoft, roughly 97% of the breaches against Azure AD use legacy authentication protocols. Currently, Microsoft is ramping down legacy authentication for Exchange Online, but this has been delayed due to COVID, but it is in progress as we speak. Conditional access policy, which prevents the usage of legacy authentication protocols, is still needed since there are other APIs that accept legacy protocols, and thus this needs to be blocked until further notice. And then third but not least, the non-existence of emergency accounts. So this is effectively enables a logging to the environment in an emergency. Case in point could be a few years back, Microsoft had some issues with their MFA. And in those type of situations, this type of emergency account would allow get you an access to your environment to do critical stuff if needed. How to then mitigate these matters? Effectively evaluate the CAP in different scenarios, as mentioned above, and the use cases that there might be, and based on them, then create and configure the policies against best practices and also the organization's own security policy. Quite basic stuff, as we've gone through during this presentation. Like many of these are basic stuff, but what we still see is lacking. Then we have the administrative roles and permissions. So when talking about basics, let's start from the top. We have global admin accounts that are used for daily operations instead of limited admins. Nothing too difficult. And on the other side of the coin, there are too many administrator accounts with high privileges permissions in the tenant. And these are easily found in the assessments and quite easily fixed also. Then in last week, we had an environment in the assessment where we found several stale admin accounts. There were anything from 1 to 3 years ago created and never used after that. So one might beg the question that, okay, why have they been created in the first place? What are their, how well they benchmark against current password policies? And is there a risk that those will be used by bad actors? Most of them in this example was to service providers and third parties originally. So stale admin accounts should be taken care of. And then, as mentioned before, privileged identity management is not in use. A great way to make sure that you provide the access or grant the access for only a certain part of time when that is needed, and then you take that away. Keep it simple. Then how to mitigate this matter? Effectively evaluate the current administrative roles and permissions, and reduce as much as possible the number of administrators in the environment. And then use the Azure AD PIM to grant eligible permissions instead of permanent permissions. And you can actually create then also security monitoring rules for violation of this PIM process, referring to the SOC service. And that's highly recommended by us. Then last but not least, is in general security monitoring in cloud context. We see even today, we focus on large enterprises and large organizations in the Nordics, and even today we see environments where there is no proper security monitoring in place, or the configuration is not designed or configured effectively against the threats that the organization is facing. On the other side, then, when the security monitoring is in place, there are quite often areas or gaps within the data collection that makes the detection of the threats more difficult, coming back to what type of logs should be received and what not. Or then there is that okay, all the data for me right away, and then you end up in a situation where you need to consider the cost, whether that be just the retention of the log information, or then, for example, the CMSOAR capacity cost, which can be quite hefty. How to mitigate these? Basically, one has to evaluate the current status of the monitoring in your environment. So make sure, use, for example, MITRE ATT&CK matrix as a benchmark to which you start analyzing that, okay, what do we want to cover with our security monitoring, what type of attacks and threats. And then the other part is, especially with cloud security tooling and solutions, we see that the configurations need updates and reconfiguration quite often. Sometimes environment that was built 3 months ago and configured up to standards might need a tweak with Microsoft Defense tools, just because Microsoft is rapidly developing their own package. And in order to keep that in up to date, this is becoming more of a continuous process that will need to be done in a, if not monthly, maybe quarterly basis. But yeah, that's from me, and then summary from Mr. Malki.
Yep. So maybe to summarize on a really high level the presentation and the findings from these two cloud platforms. So we have three major areas that we have been kind of covering on both sides. So the permissions, there are coarse-grained privileges to wide permissions, long-lived credentials and whatnot. Logging and monitoring and the detection capabilities. So either the logging is it's lacking the proper logging. There are unclear responsibilities in terms of what is it that we should log and monitor, as discussed already earlier, and also rudimentary incident response processes. So something might be off, or people are not aware on how the process would work actually in case of a security incident. And finally, the resource isolation. So whether it being network segmentation, east, west, north, south, insufficient egress and egress traffic monitoring, and then multiple different workloads and teams working within the same AWS accounts or Azure subscriptions, for instance. So that's it from the summary part. I think we still have a few minutes to with us. So if you have any additional questions or comments or whatnot, but other than that, I think that was the presentation from our side. So thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. So already saw on hand from Vijay, I think. So
Hey, hi. Yeah. I just have one question by the way. First of all, thank you so much, Sarika and Luke, for the nice presentation. That was great. The only thing I want to know, because most of these recommendations are easily available in some of the free tools from AWS or Azure, be it Advisor, Security Hub, the Microsoft Defender for Cloud in the free versions. So how IDnext is providing some value additions while doing some recommendations or doing some kind of assessment, or what is the value addition from your side, and like in finding out those kind of recommendation and giving them as solutions?
Well, I would say that the value added is that even though you have those, like you mentioned, those tools in place or available, the organizations are clearly not using them. So we are raising the awareness within the, let's say, individual development teams or data teams or whatever, whomever is the target audience of the assessment. And second of all, we are also kind of evangelizing and broadcasting that message to the let's say cloud center of excellences or whatnot in the customer side. And then third, I would say that not all the organizations, even the bigger ones, are actually using these services, as you mentioned, like AWS Security Hub or Config. We've seen environments in large customers just quite recently where these services were not in use. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of reasons. I mean, there's plenty of good open source tools out there, and we are using those partially as part of our technical scannings as well. So it's not about the tooling is not out there, but it's understanding what the toolings do for you. Also interpreting the findings. If you think about Security Hub and AWS Security Hub best practices. I think it consists of like roughly 200 really technical controls. It produces a lot of noise even if you switch it on to a blank account. So you need to understand what it does. You need to understand what is relevant and not. So we're kind of, based on the discussions we've had with the teams, we kind of help them get going. So that's maybe the added value as well. But it's always, it depends a lot on the organization and their level of maturity, how much they have actually invested in these things. So I would say that's. I'm not sure if Sakari, you have something.
And I would add to that. Yes, these are the findings, and then we have we focus in our security assessments on the recommendations, so that what you see over here, those are just tip of the iceberg when it comes to the depth of the recommendation side. So we acknowledge that the value that we bring in is the actual, like, okay, what then? So what? And in most cases, in many cases, with the assessments that we do to the customers, the next logical step is actually to start implementing those recommendations together with the customer. That's not anymore part of the assessment, or it can be if you want to extend it, but another like a step towards like customer relationship, where in many cases the customer doesn't have their own cloud security experts in-house. So we can then provide them with relevant talent based on the findings in the assessment and develop their environment to maturity when it comes to cybersecurity. And then we can move into, in certain cases, where, for example, we've moved to security posture management side of thing at the customer side.
Okay. So Emily, yeah, thank you for the answer. The question that I always have, security is always an overhead for any of the organization. And if you'll say more and more control, they will say no, because the associated cost is may impact the rest of the business. So I'm like, as an IDnext, do you provide the kind of guardrails or the policies? Doesn't matter the environment, be it prod stage, non-prod, the testing that can be implemented at a root level, be it as you're on the management group in AWS at the organization level, can be substitute rest of the account. So have you created and documented somewhere? These are the guardrails, these are must and can be easily deployed in every account at the admin level.
Yeah, well, again, I would say that the what you mentioned or brought up already earlier. So let's take AWS Control Tower as an example. So it already comes with a nice set of pre-built guardrails, but there is a lot of additional things that you should incorporate as well. There might be something that you should take off. I don't have. Let's say that we don't have anything like. Let's just put this in. Merely it's about process, so it's like cloud security posture management. So we kind of maybe recommend to start off with the, let's say, what comes as an example, what comes out from Control Tower. At the same time, have a set of well-defined and understood detective controls, like in a config rules in AWS terminology, and then over time start hardening the environment and locking down the environment based on the findings that you can see that, okay, we have these detective rules, we can see that what is happening in the environment and we can be reactive, and then slowly start migrating those rules, if applicable, to guardrails. So that's the approach maybe that we have taken, and I think that's kind of a it's not even easy that way, but I would say that there's no set of predefined guardrails with which we would just take with us and go to the customers and they say that you need to deploy these ones. So it's a process more of than just a one-off exercise.
Okay, great. Thanks for answering the questions. We still have 1 or 2 minutes left. I'm not sure if there's any last question from the people here. No. Well, I do have a remark or maybe a question. I think you also mentioned in your presentation that a lot of things seems to be common sense or already seems to be there where organizations are struggling. So what are the pitfalls? Why does organizations sometimes have trouble with solving these issues? I see you already smiling, so.
Yeah. So one thing that we see is that when customers are moving to cloud, call it cloudification, what have you, they get services from cloud security cloud service providers, CSPs, and in many cases, based on our findings and with conversation with our customers, the CSPs, cloud service providers, focus is not in security; it's in cloud in general. Yeah. And while they do say that yes, we'll use the best practices when it comes to building the secure cloud for you guys, fact of the matter is they are lacking in that area, and we don't consult our customers selecting what cloud should they take. We come afterwards when the customer is already in the cloud. And basically, in many cases, it has been so that a customer has moved to the cloud, start their operations there, and then there's a CISO or somebody who's starting to wonder, like, well, actually, what is the situation of our security over here? And then we come up with a bit more brighter flashlight and start figuring out, okay, what's the situation? This matter comply with the addition on the fact that how rapidly the best practices and the configurations to the security tools and environments are changing yields the situation where even these common, well-known ways of working can be found in today's customer environments.
Okay, great. So we still need to educate the cloud service providers to make sure that also security is an important part of this item.
Yeah, and I think to some extent it's a question of you get what you measure. If you focus on winning new customers and doing transitions to cloud as much as possible, then focusing on security as a part of that equation is not in your interest.
No. So it is security by design. Okay, great. So we come to the end of the lunch break. Would like to thank you for having the presentation and also sharing your insight on this important topic. Thanks for the people attending this lunch break. It also has been recorded, so we're also going to put it online for those who would like to look back into the presentation for other people who missed it. Thank you all. Wish you all a good day, and also wish you a good best 2022. And also stay healthy. I think that's the most important part. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody.